SEP Fanfic Readings presents 1,000 Words by Olive Juice 28. Chapter 24. Plans and Confessions. Granger, thanks for your letter. It was lovely to hear from you. I'm glad you enjoyed your time at the Burrow. What have you named your puff mouse? I can't believe George gave you one. I'm sure he was thoroughly pleased with himself. Will you be bringing it back to school? Christmas here was actually really good. To be honest, I wasn't sure what to expect with my father gone, and not really knowing my aunt, but Andromeda's terrific, and Mother has been so happy to have her here. Teddy is loads of fun. Noisy, messy, constantly moving fun. He got lots of toys and books, some clothes, and a small wagon he likes to push around on his knees. Most of the time, his hair is dark brown, like Andromeda's, but when he's with me, he does change it to match. He also turned it blue one afternoon, like the hat my house elf Mary was wearing. I'm almost afraid to ask, but what is a Weasley jumper? And I would never tease you about getting books as gifts, especially since I received several myself. I'm most looking forward to reading one of the history of the Montrose Magpies, which I'm happy to let you borrow when I'm done. I know how much you adore Quidditch. Yes, please, to the Nutella replacement. I accidentally left it in my study, and my mother took it, shared it with Andromeda, and now it's completely gone. Also, yes to the cinnamon bread, and don't be ridiculous. Of course you'll be sharing your Honeyduke's haul. Any idea what the first game night of the new year will consist of? I've tried explaining the game of life to my mother and aunt, but failed miserably since neither of them quite understand the Muggle concepts of university, investments, or retirement. They were very interested in Scrabble, though, and I think I'd like to get a set for them. They could play in the evenings when Teddy's asleep after I've gone back to school. I'm not sure if Andromeda's officially decided yet, but my mother invited them to move into the manor permanently. I think it would be brilliant, and I get the impression Andromeda likes the idea. Well, I'm going to sign off here. Potter should be arriving shortly for our ministry-required check-in. He's not too bad, really, but don't tell him I said that. Do you have any plans for the New Year's? Looking forward to seeing you Sunday. What time will you be getting back? Malfoy. He had chickened out. He knew it. He just couldn't bring himself to write her first name. Surely she knew that Granger was a term of familiarity now, and not anything negative. He still called Harry Potter, although he sometimes thought of him as Harry, in his head, and he wasn't quite sure what to make of that. But he just felt horribly awkward writing out her given name when he'd never said it to her face. And if he had written it, would he then be expected to use it all the time? The thought made him break out in cold sweats. Perhaps it was a shared history that made the shift so dramatic to him. But regardless, it felt like a big deal. The fact that she had used his name 3 times now did funny things to his heart and stomach. It made him feel inordinately pleased, and dare he say, giddy. Salazar, he was a goner. He rolled up the letter, tied it with a red ribbon he'd rescued from Teddy's sticky little fingers on Christmas Day, and slid it into his pocket as he headed down to meet his personal Auror for their weekly chat. He arrived in the foyer to see the boy who avoided death like it was a profession, hugging his aunt and reaching for Teddy, who was squealing with delight, and whose hair immediately turned Harry's trademark shade of inky black. "Hey, Malfoy," Harry greeted with a grin. "Hey yourself," Draco grinned back. "I see your godson has taken a step backwards in his sense of style." He drawled, good-naturedly nodding at Teddy's raven locks. Harry chuckled and gave the baby a gentle squeeze, which was promptly responded to by the smacking of a tiny hand on his glasses with a gleeful shout. "I'll let you boys get on with the official business." Andromeda smiled and scooped Teddy back into her arms. "Narcissa has tea service set out in the library." Her voice trailed behind her as she headed down the hall. True to what they had been told, Narcissa was found in the library, sitting in a wing-back chair in front of a roaring fire. There were 2 other chairs, and a low table in the center, laden with full tea service and several plates of biscuits, scones, and tiny cakes. After their typical initial pleasantries, Harry settled back in his chair and asked if there was anything either of the Malfoys needed his assistance with in the coming weeks. Narcissa shook her head and thanked him, but Draco stayed silent for a moment, seemingly deep in thought. After a few seconds, he looked to have made a decision and sat up straighter, while glancing first at his mother, and then fixing his pewter gaze on Harry. "I want to help Granger with her parents." Harry's eyebrows disappeared into his fringe. He had clearly not been expecting this declaration, nor had Narcissa, who sat her cup and saucer down on the table with an uncharacteristically loud clank. "Malfoy, you know she's heard back from all of the experts," Harry began, his palms spread out in a gesture of dismay. "I'm not sure what else there is to do." "I know about the letters. I just can't help feeling like there's got to be something else, or someone else, who could potentially help." He took a deep breath and explained his thoughts a little further. "I've been doing some reading, and there have been healers and potioneers and charms experts over the years who have attempted to reverse all sorts of spells and curses using a combination of techniques, instead of just relying on the one tactic." Narcissa was studying her son closely. She hadn't seen him this passionate about anything in a very long time. He had mentioned the tragic story of Hermione's parents and her efforts to receive help a while ago, but hearing about it again now set something to niggling in her memory. Suddenly she stood up and strode over to the section of shelves to the right of the fireplace. "Mother, what are you doing?" Draco's question was merely met by Narcissa raising her index finger as she perused the spines in front of her. Shrugging, he turned back to Harry, who was also watching him intently. "Have you spoken to Hermione about this?" "No," admitted the blonde. "I don't really want to get her hopes up, only to have them dashed again." He then told Harry about that day, back in November, when she had received the final correspondence. She had never talked about any of it again, nor her parents, nor the letters from the so-called experts, nor any plans to continue searching for a cure. It seemed as if she'd resigned herself to the fact that her parents, although alive and well, were no longer going to be a part of her life. He knew it had to be eating her up inside, but she did a marvelous job of keeping her grief buried. "I agree with you, actually," admitted Harry. "I don't want to see her hurt again." He pinned the former Slytherin with a firm stare. "Why do you want to do this, Malfoy?" Draco knew Harry wasn't looking for an easy answer. Telling him, "She's my friend," or "I feel sorry for her," wasn't going to cut it. However, he wasn't entirely ready to make any grand declarations either. "I care about her," he said simply, meeting those emerald green eyes with sincerity. "I don't know what the future holds for us, if anything, but I know that right now, she's the best part of my world. She's—" He was at a loss for words, but was rescued from trying to express himself by Narcissa sweeping back over with a rather small and very worn book in her hands. She slid gracefully back into her chair and held the book out to the young men before her. "He might be able to help." She nodded at the book, which Draco took and opened to find it was actually a journal, not a published work. "Who is he?" Draco asked. "Alcott Fowlin Black. He's your grandmother's cousin, and although he's a bit eccentric, he's always been extremely intelligent." "Okay," said Harry slowly. "How does this help?" "Alcott was a healer for over 70 years, specializing in mind healing for most of that time. When he quit his practice, he began researching his theories about healing and reversing spells that had damaged one's memory. He's been somewhat successful using a technique that combines veritaserum and incantation, and has theorized about the use of legilimency as well." "How have we never heard of him? You would think a discovery like that." But Narcissa waved her son off impatiently. "The work he's done for the last 20 years or so has been very selective and incredibly private, for the exact reason you just alluded to. While he has made some great strides in his realm, not everything has been successful, and he does not want to go public with his findings until he has stronger results to present." "Do you think we should contact him?" Draco asked while turning the pages of the journal he still held. His relative seemed to take meticulous notes at any rate. "Why not?" Narcissa asked. "I wouldn't use Miss Granger's name or specifics at this point, but there's no harm in asking him what he thinks the possibility is of reversing any of it. He lives just outside a small village in Haute-Savoie. He's a bit of a recluse, so I doubt very highly that the details of her role in the war or the testimony she gave at your trial would have reached him." Both Draco and Harry pondered this in silence for a few minutes. Finally, gray eyes turned to meet green, and they both nodded in agreement. "Let's do it," Harry affirmed. "Should we draft a letter now?" asked Draco, feeling antsy and wanting to get started. "Sure, why not?" Harry shrugged. "Lovely." Narcissa stood and began taking steps toward the door. "Let me know if you need any help." Over the course of the next hour, Harry and Draco started and scrapped a dozen letters to this obscure wizard, unsure of exactly how to explain the situation and what bits of information were most important to include. Eventually, they edited and rewrote the missive enough to be reasonably pleased with the result. Since it was Draco's distant relative, he simply explained that he had a friend who'd had their memory modified to a rather significant degree, that this friend now no longer remembered a beloved family member, and that attempting a reversal of the original spell had been unsuccessful. He also made sure to include that the caster of the spell used no dark magic, and had not done this with harmful intent. He spoke of Alcott's prodigious skills and the impressive reputation he had, since flattery never hurt. and asked that he reply at his earliest convenience, and to please send his correspondence to Aura Potter at the Ministry. Folding the letter carefully, Draco placed it in an envelope and sealed it with the Malfoy insignia. He handed it over to Harry, who tucked it in his pocket of his robes with a promise to send it off as soon as he got back to his office at the Ministry. They both stood there for a second or two, feeling as if they were about to embark on some sort of journey together, silly as that may seem. In some ways, it was rather true. For all the months they had spent getting used to each other's presence, they had never really worked on anything together in a joint effort. The portraits were somewhat of a combined task, but he was rather removed from it, being at school. It felt a little bit odd, but mostly it gave Draco a deep sense of confirmation that he was doing the right thing. He had felt similarly when Fred's portrait was unveiled, but this ran deeper since he was actually the one who wrote the letter, and would be the one his distant relation would, hopefully, communicate with. For Harry, without question, he was happy to be doing this for his friend, but it also gave him a very real glimpse into the heart and soul of this reformed Draco Malfoy. He knew the pale Slytherin had changed from the first conversation they'd had about his pending trial when he was still in prison, but this was different. Harry was pleasantly surprised to discover the depth of his former rival's feelings for Hermione, especially since he had a sneaking suspicion she felt the same way, even though she'd yet to reveal anything of the sort to him. His internal musings were further solidified when Draco pulled a small scroll out of his pocket and sheepishly held it out. "For Hermione?" Harry asked, unable to keep the smirk off his face. Draco nodded and gave a lopsided grin. "I should start charging you. I'm not a postman, you know." "What's a postman?" "Never mind," Harry huffed good-naturedly. "See you in a few days, Malfoy." He disappeared in a whirl of green flames, and Draco turned his back down the hall to the library, whistling to himself as he went. Harry was coerced into hosting a New Year's Eve party by his bossy best friends, and his very persuasive girlfriend. At first, he had thought they just meant to invite a handful of people and have a small, friendly gathering. Within hours of the idea blossoming, however, it was clear that it was going to be a full-blown celebration, with no less than 24 people, food, drinks, music, and whatever else they had decided was necessary. He took it in his usual good-natured stride, making only one request. "We need to find a way to silence that horrid portrait of Sirius's mother for the night," he demanded. "She's going to have kittens every time someone comes in the door, or walks down the hall. We won't be able to talk above a whisper if we don't do something about her." Hermione, Ron, and Ginny knew he was right. They were sitting around the scrubbed wooden kitchen table, trying to come up with a fix. Silencing charms only lasted until a noise loud enough to penetrate them occurred. With a house full of guests, that was going to be an ongoing problem. Ron was in the midst of trying to describe the makings of some sort of soundproof box to put over it when Kreacher approached them. Kreacher would be honored to help Master and his guests, if Master would like. He bowed low, his squashy nose almost touching the floor. Harry's eyes widened in surprise. Sirius's mother had long been a favorite family member of Kreacher's. When the Order finally moved into Grimmauld Place, the elf would mutter endlessly about her, parroting her beliefs about blood purity. He was as devoted to her as Dobby had once been to Harry. "What would you suggest, Kreacher?" he asked of the wizened elf. "Kreacher would sit by her and stop her whenever she begins to speak, if Master thinks that would be useful." Again, the elf bowed and then straightened up and peered at Harry, waiting for his orders. "Well, yeah, that would be brilliant, Kreacher." Harry was grateful, but still bemused by the offer. "You wouldn't mind silencing your mistress?" Kreacher shook his head vehemently, his bat-like ears flapping about his head. "My mistress is no longer in charge here. She does not know the glorious deeds of my master. She does not understand how noble, how clever, how—" Kreacher stopped for a moment and glared at Harry with what he could only be described as furious pride. "How courageous my master is, just like Master Regulus." Harry realized that there could be no higher praise from Kreacher than that. He met the elf's eyes with deep appreciation, but before he could thank him, Kreacher continued. "Kreacher would be very proud indeed, to help Master and his friends, who have done so much to save us all." His loyal stare roved over Hermione, Ron, and Ginny, making eye contact with each of them in turn. The three companions turned their stunned expressions into Harry, who was equally amazed. While Kreacher was faithful to Harry, and had accepted the others as an extension of the boy who lived, he had never really openly displayed anything more than polite service to them. "Right then," Harry stammered. "Kreacher, if you would be okay with helping us during the party, that would be great." Kreacher bowed one last time and shuffled from the kitchen, leaving the four friends gaping at each other. After a second or two, they all let out little chuckles, shaking their heads, unsure of what to make of this new development. "What brought that about?" asked Hermione. "No idea," said Harry, "but I'm not complaining." "Me either," said Ron. They launched back into the planning of the upcoming bash, now focusing on the guest list. Hermione wanted to send invitations to everyone in the eighth-year house, since several of them, like Neville, Luna, and Dean, had already been mentioned. "We can tell everyone to bring a friend or two, so no one will feel awkward," she added. "That means Malfoy too, I suppose?" Ginny asked, sending a suspicious glance in her friend's direction. Before Hermione could do more than feign innocence, however, Harry interjected. "I'll have to get permission from Kingsley, since technically Malfoy isn't supposed to go anywhere without me." "But you'll be here," began Hermione. "Yeah, but it's a party, not community service or anything." He saw the stubborn set to her jaw and raised his hands in surrender. "I think it's a great idea to invite him. I just have to make sure it's okay." Hermione nodded and went back to adding names to the guest list, while Ron reverted back to the menu, a topic that had been discussed at length multiple times already. In the end, Creature was brought back in to finalize the list of snacks, which he seemed very pleased to help with, and even made some suggestions of his own. The girls made their way up to Hermione's room to write out the invitations, while the boys headed to Diagon Alley to pick up several cases of butterbeer and anything else they deemed important. As Ginny settled into the overstuffed chair by the window, she studied the curly-haired witch across the room, currently rummaging through her desk for parchment and quills. "So," she began in a lazy sort of drawl, "heard from Malfoy at all?" As she expected, Hermione's hands froze and her head snapped around in Ginny's direction. "What?" "I asked if you've heard from Malfoy at all over the holiday." "Oh, yes, twice. Right before Christmas, and then again yesterday," came the staccato reply. Hermione resumed her search with a slight pink tinge to her cheeks. "Mm-hmm." Ginny fought a grin at her friend's obviously flustered state. "You know, you never finished telling me about the whole Secret Santa thing. How did he like his gift?" Hermione shoved the desk drawer shut with difficulty, then stood there, clutching a stack of parchment in front of her, like a shield from the redhead's curiosity. "He liked it, I think." Ginny cocked her head in question. "You think?" Yes, he liked it. He said he did, and—" Hermione's cheeks flushed even brighter. "He gave me a hug." Ginny raised her eyebrows, the grin now twitching at the corners of her mouth. "Oh, really? And did you hug him back?" Hermione fixed her eyes on the paper in her hands and nodded, mumbling something under her breath that Ginny couldn't make out. "What was that?" Hermione flung her head back, as if speaking to the ceiling, and said in only a slightly louder tone, "I kissed him." Ginny sat bolt upright in her chair, her mouth hung open and eyes like saucers. "You what?" The brunette witch closed her eyes and nodded her head, and then took 3 steps and flung herself on her bed, crumpling the parchment and quills beneath her as she lay face down on the comforter. "You kissed him! You kissed Draco Malfoy! And you didn't tell me until now?" Ginny was incredulous. Muffled words sounded from the bed. "Sorry, you'll have to do better than that," she demanded. Hermione sat up, swiping her curls out of her face and huffing a great sigh. "Yes, I kissed him. He came to my room after the party to give me this." She reached over to her nightstand, where Ginny had seen the silver picture frame, but didn't think anything of it. "It's from our first game night, and has to do with the conversation we had about pictures, and—" She flapped her hands in impatience. "That's not important." "But it was worthy of you kissing him?" asked Ginny, still rather stunned. "It's not like I snogged him senseless," protested Hermione. "I just kissed him. Once. Well, twice, but the second time was just on the cheek, so that doesn't really count." Ginny's face had gone from stunned to completely shocked as this news was imparted. "Twice? You're saying you kissed Malfoy twice?" "Not really, just on the cheek." Hermione's own cheeks were flaming red by now, and she buried her face in her hands. So what does this mean, then?" asked Ginny, now grinning from ear to ear at this unexpected yet delightful news. Hermione groaned. "I don't know. He walked me to my flu appointment and said he would write to me, which he has, but that's where we left it." "He walked you to—" Ginny shook her head. "There's clearly more to this story than you're spilling." Hermione looked at her sheepishly, a smile twitching at the corner of her mouth. Ginny climbed on the bed next to her friend. "I think you need to start at the beginning and tell me everything."